Hey everyone, DJ here. I just wanted to go over a couple of script errors present in the last video. It turns out Sam was built in 1945, not 1954. I'm thinking it was simply a typo on my part. And it also turns out that he is not a duplex, but simply an articulated steam locomotive. I was under the impression that duplex and articulated mean the same thing, when evidently they do not. Big thanks to all of the hardcore train fans who were very patient with me. But with that out of the way, let's get into the video. Season 12 of Thomas & Friends is, certainly a season. Releasing in 2008 at the tail end of the model era of Thomas & Friends, Season 12 was probably the most innovative season of Thomas to date, as that season opted to heavily integrate CGI into the show for the first time. That's not to say that CGI hadn't been used before in Thomas, it's just that this is the first time it was so upfront and used to such a degree. All of the engine's faces, people, animals, and even Harold were animated using CGI. Essentially anything that couldn't move convincingly as a model prop was done with CGI. As to whether or not the effects hold up today is a discussion for another video. Now, I bring this up because for as innovative as Season 12 was, it still suffered immensely from the writing and general branding problems the show had been dealing with since the hit buyout during Season 7. That meant a focus on the show being marketed for much younger children and written as such, which of course affected the show's characters especially and led to a lot of new characters that were either terrible or severely underutilized, which brings me to the subject of this character breakdown, Hank, the ultramarine blue Pennsylvania Railroad K4, by far the most suggested character for this series so far. Hank is described by the wiki as being large and bold, coming off as brash due to his confidence and enthusiasm, and in his jolliness comes off as kooky and goofy. It also describes him as being one to look out for the smaller engines, and one who gladly uses his strength to assist others when needed. He also accurately has an American accent, which reflects his basis. Hank only ever appeared once in Thomas, and that was in the Season 12 episode Heave Ho Thomas, an admittedly fun episode that I still enjoy, even if it is purely for nostalgia, however, still having the stupid 3 strikes formula that we all loathe. I'll talk about how this episode handles itself and Hank specifically later. Anyhow, Hank arrives on the island for reasons that are never stated, and he and Thomas were supposed to work together for the day before Hank's welcome party at Knapford. Thomas, however, becomes insulted after Hank innocently calls Thomas one of the finest little engines he'd ever seen. This causes Thomas to try and do all of the work without Hank's help, which results in him cracking a cylinder and finally letting Hank help. The episode ends with Thomas and Hank celebrating Hank's arrival at his welcome party, and then he was just never seen again, which for some reason was a trend with a lot of the new hit era characters, but again, we'll come back to that, and the rest of the issues with Hank's character specifically later on. For right now, I want to talk about Hank's basis, as it's pretty cool. Hank is based on a Pennsylvania Railroad K4 class, a group of 462 steam locomotives, of which 425 were built between 1914 and 1928. They worked as PRR's primary mainline passenger steam locomotives until 1957. Now, Hank doesn't wear a K4 number, or any number for that matter, so unless anyone has any information I don't think Hank is meant to be a real K4, and certainly not one of the 2 preserved K4s, those being number 3750, who was on display at the Pennsylvania Railroad Museum near Strasburg, Pennsylvania, and number 1361, who is at the Railroaders Memorial Museum in Altoona, Pennsylvania, where her restoration is in full swing. The K4s were designed in response to PRR's need for larger and heavier passenger locomotives in the 1910s. They were designed under the supervision of PRR's Chief of Motive Power, James T. Wallace, with the first K4, number 1737, being outshopped in May of 1914 at PRR's Junita shops in Altoona, Pennsylvania, with the construction number 2825. 1737 was more of a prototype, however, and 3 years passed between any more K4s being built due to testing and wartime measures prioritizing the construction of L1 Mikado types for freight service over the K4s. Once full production began in 1917, most of the K4s were built by Junita shops, however, numbers 5400 to 5474 were built by Baldwin. The K4s were pretty impressive performatively speaking, having a top speed of a respectable 87 miles per hour, a power output of 3,286 horsepower, with a total weight of 234 tons and a tractive effort of 44,460 pound-force. Although successful at first, the K4s were unfortunately not powerful enough to meet the demands of the heavier passenger trains they had to pull from the mid-1930s onwards, often needing to be double-headed, which eventually resulted in their work being taken over by diesel and even electric locomotives as well. And finally, their complete withdrawal in 1957. As I said, 2 are preserved, with 1 being restored, so Hank does indeed live savant in both the real world and in headcanon, if that's how you choose to look at it. What's cool about Hank in the K4s is that they actually have ties to Gordon and the GNR, later LNER, A1 class built by Sir Nigel Gresley. Apparently, Gresley was influenced by the design of the K4's boiler and incorporated those influences into the design of the A1 boiler. In terms of the character of Gordon specifically, there is also a connection in the form of the Streamlined K4, number 3768, nicknamed the Torpedo, which reportedly served as the inspiration for Gordon's streamlined shooting star look in the 2016 Thomas & Friends film The Great Race. Number 3768 was built in 1920 and cased in a streamlined shroud by industrial designer Raymond Lowery in 1936. 4 more K4s, including number 1120, 2665, 3678, and 5338, were also streamlined in 1940 and 41. All 4 of these engines, including 3768, had their streamlining removed before 1950. I have to admit, going into this, I had never really looked into the K4s before, but knowing all of this history now, I definitely understand why Hank was suggested as my next topic character so much. And very similarly to all of the American locomotives in Thomas, my only problem with Hank is that he would have of course been way too big for the British loading gauge, but as I said in the last video, it's very much a nitpick, and I don't really consider loading gauge to be a thing in Thomas. With all this history now covered though, I would like to dive into Hank as a character specifically. Hank, as I said, only ever appeared in one episode of Thomas & Friends, that being Heave Ho Thomas in Season 12, and it wasn't even a very good episode. It does, of course, use the stupid 3 strikes formula that's present in almost every Hit Era episode, but what's even worse is the fact that the episode doesn't even have anything original writing-wise in terms of having Hank as the new character, as it's basically the same as every other Thomas Meets the New Character episode. There's a new character on Sodor, Thomas goes to meet them, character tries to help, doesn't try, or doesn't like what Thomas is doing, 3 strikes later, they all learn a lesson and it's over. Yay! Ugh. That's not true for every new character episode. I remember Rosie's being written fairly well, but hell, Heave Ho Thomas even has the Thomas doesn't like the new character trope, which has been done a million times before. What's also ridiculous about all of this is the fact that Hank, in terms of his personality as described on the wiki, seems to have a bit of nuance. He's described as having confidence and jolliness, as well as a goofy side, that makes him come off as brash. My question is, where the hell did this information come from, and where was it in the episode, because I sure as hell didn't see it. In the episode, Hank just wants to help and be friendly, but in typical Thomas fashion, Thomas is a jerk. None of this goofy confidence or whatever seems to be seen, except for when he talks to people at the station or whistles to kids on the bridge, but even then it seems to be just him acting friendly. This of course wouldn't be an issue if it weren't for the fact that there are like a million generic new characters who are described as friendly and helpful across Thomas media, and it just makes Hank feel kinda generic. This might sound a little mean-spirited, but I feel like you could honestly just swap him and Sam at random and nothing would change. They are almost the same character and serve the exact same purpose, a big, strong, friendly, happy engine that Thomas meets. When it comes to fixing Hank, I normally would have a whole segment for that, but it's honestly really simple. Just put him in more episodes, develop this goofy, confident personality he apparently has, and give us a reason other than his basis to like him. But in regards to Hank's character as it is, that's pretty well all I have to say. In conclusion, Hank is a character that has a really cool basis and was criminally underutilized in the show. I think he had a lot of potential, yes, I'm sounding like a broken record in these videos, and would definitely have made a much stronger impact if used more and with better writing to begin with. I am happy, however, that from what I've seen, he does live fondly in the memories of most Thomas fans, so that's a nice thing to leave off on with Hank. Thank you guys for watching. I know I said I was going to do a British engine for this video, but Hank was suggested the most by far, and hey, why not give the people what they want, right? If you have suggestions for future characters, leave them in the comments, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye, guys!